So, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. We've got another fantastic guest this afternoon. My name is Sally Penni. I'm a barrister and I'm the founder of Women in the Law UK. Welcome to this lunchtime webinar. Our guest speaker today is Graham. Graham is a solicitor with the legal director. Forgive me, the screen's going a bit sort of mental. There we are. Or rather my Zoom incompetence, we all get there. And so we're going to do an interview format with Graham. We'll speak for about 20 to 25 minutes. But Graham, welcome. And I'd like to just start from the beginning of kind of your career, really. You were, until recently, you were at Penni's Corporate, which is a law firm in Manchester. And then you went to the legal director, and I'd like you to just tell us a bit about that actually in a moment. You've got 2 kids, and you're struggling to juggle as well, like the rest of us.
Yes, the one thing I'm grateful for is my daughter went back to school yesterday, so that's it's been an intense 3.5 months. I know, bless her, she's only 5, but yeah, she's a strong-minded young child already. So. We'll see. So we've already got a 1-year-old as well. So it's been a bit intense, but so I'm grateful for that. But as Sally mentioned, I work as a consultant legal director through the legal director, which is a bit confusing, but a remote law firm. I also work as a data compliance specialist and business consultant. I'm a director at Cube Thinking, which is work a lot with Lancashire County Council and Booster, a business up in the Northwest as well. Hopefully rolling out some legal services on that in future as well, but that's new news, and also a psychotherapist. So a few different hats, which is why I think, and obviously number 1 husband, father, so that's the number 1 job, I should say. So a few hats on at the moment, but recently it kind of came about actually why I'm at the legal director, because I was speaking for one of Sally's events back in May, and I bumped into one of the directors there, and they immediately tried to poach me, and I said, well, actually, I'm just about to start at Penni because my other law firm had separated, gone their different ways, and I was looking for a role there, so I wasn't looking. But in that time, after joining a role there, we had our second child, Ford, and my wife was struggling a bit with, I think, work, potentially some kind of symptoms of postnatal depression and things like that. It was quite difficult actually being in a law firm again in private practice. I'm sure we'll come to it in a bit. I kind of dipped in and out of different roles through my career, and I decided that it wasn't really working for me at that point in time. Nothing to do with the firm, because they are a really good firm and very good to me, but decided to kind of go my own way and set up my own consultancy business, and the legal director supports that approach by kind of providing all the network and the infrastructure and the IT and the accounts and everything behind that, similar to kind of Gunner Cook in some ways. I know that someone here from that, some similarities there, and it gives it a certain amount of flexibility, and then give me time to kind of do some other business ideas and therapy as well, and decided to, at perfect timing, at the end of January, to start my own business. We're not necessarily seeing us on the horizon, but it's been relatively good and productive since then, and I've been enjoying the balance, even though, as I said, it's sometimes quite intense being at home, locked down with a whole family in a house for since the start of March. So that's where I am now as a nutshell.
Brilliant. Well, let me, I know this is going to feel like a cross-examination. It's not.
Please go for it. I've always wanted to be cross-examined by you, Sally. So
I know, but I don't think you've got enough for me to cross-examine properly, like in court about. But let me take you back, Graham. Really, you told us a lot there. You've got 4 hats, and father came lastly at the end of that list, I noticed. But it's actually been the first on that list since January. And really, I want to focus on the importance of having other interests and other business interests. There's a lot of sort of younger people on here today who are just starting out in their career, and the sort of legal careers that they might want to forge, because the market is, of course, going to be very different. But having other interests in addition to practicing law. So I just wondered, just very briefly, why did you go into law in the first place, and then how have you ended up being a therapist and setting up your own business? We know how you became a father. You don't need to explain. But why have you got these other interests, and what do they add next to your performance?
Well, I suppose there's a lot of different questions there. My turn, I suppose, to unpack that. And I would say it's probably a series of clear decisions and aims, and some of the things of being open to opportunity and being willing to adapt through life. Because I think we often go to university, or particularly a career in law, and suddenly think that there's a way through it, or we study or make LPC training contract to progress to a law firm, might do a stint in-house, and it's can be quite linear, but actually there was a number of different routes through that. When I started the decision to do law, it was a difficult one. I think sometimes it's quite early to decide at 16 what we're going to study, and it was something that interested me, and I thought I wasn't too sure of what else to do, and had the grades, and so it's one of those that I kind of thought seemed like a decent fit, but perhaps should have done a bit more research at the time. However, I'm glad it turned out that route. So I decided to go into law just because it seemed like a good opportunity, and I liked the course that was going on at Manchester at the time. So I moved up here. So it was, again, part decision, part seeing what the opportunity was. And then in a similar way, I progressed through that, trying to maintain different interests in life and do different things. I immediately, when I suppose finished law, I took a year out and applied to defer my training contract, which TLT were kindly willing to do. So I took a year out then, and I suppose that started a certain period in my 20s of working a bit and traveling a bit. I also worked and I did some legal project work and project management, and working with some agencies down in South Africa for quite a while, and lived there. And then came back and worked in-house for Lehman Brothers, who were then Ascendant, and then into eShore, and again dipping off in between. We kind of converted and drove a bus down to Morocco and back, and I suppose there was a pit that was my wife at that point. So we did a few things in between, and I think I've always had those interests, and I have always been dealt with the question, well, why did you do that, or what do you think it's brought to, or do you think you could bring a career in law? And I think I think people are far more open to wanting professionals who are different, who are real, who are actually able to engage with different aspects of perhaps personality, who have something to bring to the conversation. Clients, I think, enjoy a willingness of people to be real and to actually engage with them, because a lot of them are running businesses with pressures, and I think they like people to have a certain amount of life experience. And I think being able to manage in different situations, in different stressful situations, or working with different cultures and working in different places, or trying something different, shows a certain amount of adaptability and a willingness to change and engage. And as part of doing that, I began becoming interested in myself, my own kind of mental health and awareness, and kind of observing my own mind, which kind of started developing that interest. So it's been partly a choice and partly seeing how I felt and adapting. And I think as I come back to work with law firms, they like people who were able to think about problems differently, who could perhaps bring a different point of view and actually become part of a team. And I think this conscious move towards kind of diverse thinking and diverse business is only going to be exemplified or become a greater influence going forward, as people are able to work in more diverse ways, remotely, engaging in a I think, a far more kind of fluid and flexible way. Then there's the opportunity for lawyers to do things even more flexibly. And so that's so I could keep going, because it's obviously there's a lot to talk about, but that is kind of in a nutshell.
Yeah. Well, on these webinars, or certainly during lockdown, I've been very keen to encourage people so that the law is not just the only, part they've got to play. And so, because it then gives you just a more rounded, dynamic sense of where one is. So there are people on here who want to become vloggers. Some want to write blogs, not just make video blogs. And, others want to drink Prosecco and do wine tasting, whatever. Interestingly, there's a study by Harvard about when deals are made, they're done over a bottle of wine. They're not actually done in a corporate room like we often think. So diversifying in a different way is quite interesting. Interesting about doing the psychotherapy side and how that's become rather useful to the workplace. So I just wanted to ask you a bit about that, really, because were you doing to do, and where in your career did that come about?
Yes, so I got the gist of different interests and businesses, and perhaps psychotherapy in particular for me. And I agree, and I think having different interests and having something else to fall back on is useful, or having something else to run alongside a career in law is far more, I think, accepted than it used to be. But in fact, I think can bring certain attributes in both directions. I think I use skills, my legal skills as a therapist and some of my therapy skills as a lawyer. And I think the world of these being separate channels is no longer going to be the same. We're actually going to be using similar skills in our career. And so for me as a psychotherapist, I think there's the analytical skills, the ability to build a relationship, to hold someone in a space and try and get to the real root and nub of an issue, to be able to help someone feel secure and trust, and all the things that actually a lot of people want to feel when they speak with a solicitor. Are those kind of feelings that they're held and they're secure and they're understood and they're really listened to. And I think sometimes it can be, there's a risk as a lawyer to say, well, actually, hang on, here's all this information, here's all this legal stuff that I know, I know all this, and isn't this great? But actually what the client really wants to know is that you've understood their key issue and actually can drill down to what it is about the law that's relevant for them, in the same way that in the therapy room we want to know what is relevant, what is going on for them, what are the key things that actually maybe they've not seen reflected back to them. And so it's taking the knowledge and actually making it relevant in the space. And so I think that there's a lot of kind of cross skills that I've been able to use, perhaps more than I expected when I first started being a therapist or counsellor.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about this? About the people who are just like, do you know, I just want to get into law, do the law, be good at it, and that's it. And that's what all you should do. Because that's quite a prevailing argument for people who practice law. I'm not suggesting I agree with it, and I'll proffer an alternative view in a moment. But what do you say about that? People who are just like, I just want to be a lawyer and do it, earn loads of money, go on holiday. Who cares about anything else?
It's hard for me to say, because I suppose everyone's entitled to their own choices. For me, I've not necessarily found that an easy fit. I think there's more to life than just being a lawyer, and I think shown by the increased levels of anxiety and depression within the profession shows that actually it can be very all-encompassing, particularly in private practice or working hard to get to the top. And actually, there's enough studies now to show that someone with a well-balanced life or having different interests can actually be more productive at work. And so for me, I don't think that's necessarily a healthy way to perhaps live, and it's not the way I would like to do it. I think that actually I have more to offer my clients by having a greater level of interest. I think particularly having experience of different businesses, trying to set up my own business, or working in different professions, therapists working in different cultures, even traveling and being able to feel self-sufficient and manage myself, they're all things that I can bring in, and also people can relate to and want to relate to. So I actually think there's a lot of strength to be able to do things differently. And I think a lot of clients who are out there in the real world want their lawyers perhaps sometimes to feel a bit more real than perhaps sometimes we do, or we have to keep it this facade. And actually I believe in trying to make a connection. So I think that there's a bit of a risk of trying to be just a lawyer, because I wonder what is that? What does that actually mean? Is anybody just one thing? And then before we know it, it can actually be can overtake, and actually could end up having negative impacts on other things. And actually, if it's something that is part of who we are, then actually we might give more of an opportunity to enjoy it. But again, that's my experience anyway.
Yeah, no, and a good one. Just on that, some people, we had a session called "How to Raise Your Profile and Win More Clients" by Stuart Anderson, who does some like free PR for us, and he's an ex-journalist, great guy. And one of the things I said to him was that I'm not a comfortable social media person because I get annoyed when I write articles about the law, and the subject, we hate talking about ourselves. We had this conversation, didn't we, Graham?
We did.
When I write articles on the law, our legal books and what have you, you get 16 people have a look at it. If I post something about wearing glitter for charity for a month, it's like 40,000 views and over 200 comments, right?
I know.
So I'm really interested in, and he was talking about the human side of the law.
Yeah.
And people being interested in the human side of the law. So I think Caroline is doing an open swim for charity, or whatever. And as a barrister, I am interested in that, actually. When I think about all the barristers on Twitter, and all the colleagues and all the people I know within the law who are active in many ways, active, not activist, it's about the other side of it. So I wondered if there was something about the brain, and we've got the left and right side of the brain, haven't we? And people who practice yoga will know that, you know, one side is the creative side, which doesn't get used as much, the other one's linear sector. So and if they're in balance, that's when you get the magic about people being at their peak performance. So I wondered if there was a link between that and certainly the successes you've had from doing slightly, you know, you're not unconventional by any means, if I may say so, but just slightly atypical than just sitting in an office doing law.
Yeah, I think it's, if you touch on the therapy, it's about being the whole and having the whole self and being in touch with all sides of personality. And being a lawyer can be very, I best get this right, left brain, so very kind of linear, I suppose, and direct, but actually by engaging other parts of our personality and being able more engaged perhaps with our felt sense and our feelings and our emotions and kind of our reactions in the moment, or sport or music or yoga, or all the things that actually engage different parts of our brain, it actually can help synapses to grow, which grow throughout our life. It's one of the few things that keep growing on different sides, the different parts of the brain, and we can actually develop the brain to work more quickly or differently, or train it and coach it to be different than the way it was before. And so actually bringing these different bits together, I think, gives the opportunity to be a whole, to be able to know the analytical side, but actually understand and relate to the situation, the client, the problem, to build, I think, a career. And I think we were talking about how to win clients. And in my experience, the biggest thing about having clients and certainly keeping and then getting other people willing to engage is the relationship side, is the human side, is the willingness to be myself, as well as demonstrating I know what I'm on about, hopefully. So I think it's about both sides, and I think the people we work with want to see both sides. And I think there's an opportunity now, as technology is changing and the way the legal services are going to have to be practiced. We're going to go through, I think the next 10 years is going to be a big shift in professional services, probably accountancy and legal are the next two that are really going through it already. But it gives you an opportunity to do things differently and engage differently. So I agree. I think it's about the whole, and actually by embracing that, there's opportunity to do things differently and hopefully get a happier balance.
Brilliant. Just bear with me. The one of my children, the middle one, is like a super brain. He's just taken to be naked in the house. So if you see me just doing that, it's because I'm like, just go and put your pants back on. I know they're not going anywhere, but you know, homeschooling just brings a whole load of other stuff, right?
It does. Yeah, no, that's why my daughter likes to spend a lot of the time wandering around naked as well at the moment. I think it's just, so who knows what that's about, but it's...
I know. The liberal side of me would say...
exactly. Be free. But looking back, she's at school, so I'm pretty sure she's got clothes on, hopefully.
Yeah. So. Well, I think William would die if I told any of his football mates, you know. He'd be like, don't tell anyone. So, Graham, the next question I've just got on my list, and then we'll go to you guys in the audience, is about what was it like leaving private practice and then becoming general counsel, and then then you went to somewhere else as general counsel. You were very good at it, and then you went back to private practice, which is when you and I met, and then now effectively running your own business. So let's do it the first way: private practice to general practice, because people don't really talk about it, or they have done on here, but they're people who've stayed GCs.
Yeah, exactly. It's the going back, and often people ask me, "Oh, you've gone back," as if it's. And I think sometimes there's a bit of a barrier between the two. I think sometimes private practice can be a little bit snobby about perhaps in-house, and in-house can be a little bit, oh, how do you cope with the private practice work-life balance and things? And actually, it doesn't have to be that different. I moved into in-house quite early in my career because I'm a commercial IT tech lawyer, but that is very much suited. I do a lot of business work to running clients, and often along the employment lines, the most common ones to be found in-house. So there's a natural fit. So I kind of did it because there was a good role, and there's an interesting role at Lehman Brothers. So I turned up on the day they were going. On the Monday, it all went down, so I didn't really know what was going on, and everyone else was coming out with boxes, but I still had a role. And I really enjoyed the fact that you're very close to the business, close to directors. You get a lot of exposure to documents at and running projects at a more junior level than perhaps you would in private practice. A good experience. Really enjoyed that. As I said, then moved to Eshore after a little sojourn in a bus. I knew, and so that was another way to, I suppose, take it to the next level, really start working at kind of strategic and board level, and very much work alongside the board, at which point become clear that most business owners, if you can't really give them advice in 10 bullet points for a board meeting, then it's not going to go anywhere. So all this pages and pages of advice is not that relevant. It's really what it means for them. And so I really enjoyed that, and then I did actually some contracting work for Eshaw when I moved back up north for family reasons from Brighton. So we moved back up here, and I contracted in. So I've done contracting as well in between. And then that kind of died off, and I thought, well, I looked at in-house and I looked at private practice, and there wasn't anything in-house at the time which really interested me, but there was a good small firm up here, HRC, in central Manchester, doing good things at the time. And they were looking for someone to build a commercial team. So I thought, wow, that sounds different and quite exciting. So I moved back in, and it was a step up in energy, but I think that might just be the level of experience at the time, and the fact that I was trying to build something, was building something in it, and it was going well. But I still only worked 4 days a week. I said to them, I'm only willing to do 4 days. It obviously crept over a bit into the others, but there was no issue with asking for part-time. And the reason was I wanted to spend time as a family and do a bit of therapy. And I think people were very open to that. So I was a bit busy fitting it all in, but I enjoyed it, a good firm. And so for me, I think there's a lot of relevant skills from in-house that I took back into private practice that perhaps not all private practice lawyers had, because they weren't perhaps have been as close to businesses, and vice versa. There's a lot of interchangeable skills. And then that was a good couple of years, as you know, when it went at Sally, and then they different partners went in different directions, and I decided to go to Penni, which you've heard, and now moving into running my own business. At the moment, I feel like it's the best natural balance for me, because I am someone who likes having different hats and different interests. I like doing the legal work. I like the business and community, the kind of focus I'm doing through Cube at the moment, and doing the therapy. So for me, it's a nice fit. There are additional responsibilities that, I've got no guaranteed income for a few months. I have to earn it. There has to be in the pipeline. It's a lot of responsibility, particularly during COVID, but there is still work going on out there, and it's been relatively good. So it's a different pressure, but I enjoy being able to take my own decisions and being able to choose. And I don't get any holidays, but I also can just choose to stop for the day, or not work a day, or work over the weekend or evening. I get the flexibility to pick and choose a bit, to manage my time, and then I earn my rewards with that as well. So I think there's merits in all of them, and I suppose the key point with me is that I would say is that there's interchangeable skills. Don't think because we've gone down one path we can't go down another path. Actually, most of the time it's just having a clear reasoning why it's worked and what we're taking from it that people want to hear. So I think there's a lot of real ability to take or my learning from different areas, including working abroad and things, into whatever role I've been into. And the second thing is to ask. I've asked to take a year out. I've asked to have a few months off when I finished my training contract. I asked to change roles. I asked to move it to Manchester. I asked to work part-time, and everybody, it's always been understanding. The places I've worked at have always given me the opportunity to do that. So I think actually don't be afraid to ask. I think most people are actually human on the inside, despite saying we're lawyers who are working on this one path of trying to get to the top. Actually, we're all human, and we all want to do things that work for ourselves as well and help us feel better. So I think if I hear other people doing the same, I've actually had good responses. So I think it's always worth having a conversation, whether if it's something you want to do, or when I was at Penni and I was saying, well, actually, I'm struggling a bit because my wife's struggling a bit. We're having issues. She's not particularly happy. I think I need to support her. And people understood, and they did their best to be flexible. It just became clear to me that wasn't the path I wanted to be on right now. So I think it's always better to have a conversation and to ask and be open, and people respond to that.
And actually, Graham, the quite big firms like Evershed, or the big city firms, not that Evershed is or not, are losing a lot of lawyers to GCs. It's a quality control issue. So a lot of law firms are now kind of thinking, oh, well, what can we do to retain them? Because a lot of women, of course, become GCs. And there is a bit, I don't know where it comes from, but people have a bit of a stigma. Like, you can't hack it if you go in-house, or you can't this, you can't that. It's nonsense. The GCs I know work hard, they earn a lot of money, and they're happier, but they just tend to be a bit forgotten about because they're not in private practice. So people, they invite them to dues, or honestly, I know loads, and I always invite them. I'm like, yeah, should we go to theatre? Yeah, But there is that kind of weird thing And it's a nonsense. But yeah, now the law firms are actually, so I don't know if you found that actually suddenly when you go in-house, because businesses need the lawyers to think about the business. It can't just be the law.
Yeah, I completely found that, and I think it can be a bit one dimensional. And maybe it's because there's partly a kind of a subconscious threat about losing people, or the fact that maybe some people in private practice wish they'd made that decision. But I think, as I said, I do think there's benefits to both. I've enjoyed both. But being general counsel, yeah, the kind of the level of meetings and any kind of BD and development in the client work, obviously it's very different because I've already got my clients internally. So you do kind of almost get left off. And I do think there has been perhaps a little bit of snobbery or the odd comments, particularly when I moved back to private practice, of people going, what were you doing leaving it, or why, how have you chosen to go back to private practice? That's going to be a bit of a shock, isn't it? And actually work very hard in general counsel as well. It's just a different way of doing things, and it's closer to business and closer to business decisions. And I think incredibly relevant for giving clients the advice that they want. And I think law firms are very interesting. One of my good friends and future colleagues, Amir McCann, who works Flex and Surmise at tech firms and legal firms in Manchester, but here they do things very differently in supplying temporary lawyers as well, and they engage a lot with people who are studying. So I'm interested about to hear from other people on this meeting what their interests are in working for law firm in the future, because they did a study and apparently came out the key things of people. There's obviously concern about the longevity of the legal sector given the pressures of technology coming up, but also that people wanted to work in areas that were innovative, diverse, flexible, not always the things that people would relate to large law firms or traditional law firms, but actually this seems to be the businesses that people wanted to work in. So so it's going, well, actually, how does that fit in for any kind of legal job now and for the law firms? And I think perhaps they're having to look around and go, actually, we've got a bit of a brain drain, so what isn't working? And I think I felt that as well, that actually there's an opportunity to do things differently. So I'd be interested to know, after we into this, if anyone else on this call, what you would be looking for in a law firm or a legal business, not just to help me in my own decisions in business, but I would be interested to know, because I've heard that third party, there's a change in mentality.
Interesting. Well, people can write it in the chat. So my final question really to you, Graham, is that you've had quite a response when you've asked for flexible working, or you've asked for this, or you've asked for that. You've had employers or firms you've worked at who have been quite responsive. Do you think that's because you're a man? And secondly, how's your wife been about you changing and chopping all these different interests?
Good question. I can answer the second bit more easily, I would think. My wife, I'm very lucky. Liz is very supportive with me and wants me to be happy. So I'm lucky with that. And we've never chosen to saddle ourselves with lots of debt or large properties. So we always had a certain amount of flexibility for us to do things differently. And she believes and has been through a lot of kind of counselling herself, but also partly trained in some NLP and other therapy. So she's very aware of that and believes in having a well-rounded personality. So I've been very supportive in doing things differently, as well as taking time off and trying, because also it's about me being around more, being present for her, particularly when my daughter was born and I went for part-time so I could have another day at home. Well, recently, one of the big reasons for changing, because she was finding things difficult, and so there's more important things in life. And so she's been very supportive in that. The first bit, have people been more receptive to me because I'm a man? It's hard to know, because I'm a man, so I've not been treated any differently. However, I'm not naive enough to think that I wouldn't have been treated differently for being a woman. And maybe if I was asking as a trainee as opposed to an associate, I don't know, but I would expect. I think it's sometimes easier, when some of the studies I've been reading on the psychotherapy thing, that men find it easier to ask, as often women don't. I mean, I can't vouch for that, but that's some of these studies from more on the therapy side than the legal side. I read that actually men are more willing to actually put themselves forward and say, I deserve a bonus, or I deserve the pay rise, or be louder, or ask more. And actually, in some ways, that can be very negative, because it could have a negative impact, I suppose, on women going for the same roles or wanting to ask. And I don't know. Also, there are still more men in law firms, but that's changing a lot now. So I don't know if that's going to be, in senior, I suppose, in the senior teams, I don't know if that is changing and will change dynamics over time or not. So probably a slightly vague answer because I'm not fully sure on that.
No, and you're not a comparator, but it is, when I do a lot of employment cases and the men contact me to say, I'm having these issues at work, it's often over flexible working or the field that they're somehow not working as hard or taking it seriously because they want to, go down to 4 days as opposed to 5, or, just have practical things that they actually want to do because they want to see their children, or they've got caring responsibilities. And we're not quite there yet with firms who can go, yes, of course. And women find it a bit harder. And also there is a study which said, that women, we like to sort of moan and whinge about it to our friends and our girlfriends more, instead of just going, well, I'm going to ask and then see what the consequences are. And I think men do that. Men do go. I know from a personal experience, for recently doing something where we require references, and there's a lot of references for the thing. And like all my male friends are like, yeah, just ask them. And I was going, and one of them started recounting this story of a judge that we both know, who actually is retired now, but was a good friend of mine. Before he could finish the story, I was saying, oh yeah, what a nice bloke. And then he was like, yeah, I asked him for the reference. I always knew he didn't like me, and he declined. So, and I was like, oh my God, the imposter syndrome. And he was like, no, at least I knew then. I always thought he didn't like me and he wouldn't support any application I was making. So that gave me the answer and I could move on. And it was just quite an interesting, conversation about what we actually ask for. We think about other things in our head, but what do we actually ask for? And are we prepared for the response? Because once you've asked, it's out there, isn't it, right? It's like lists. People say, make a list, because then it's out of your head. Then what do you do next? So interesting.
Well, that's it. It's, in some ways, it ties into the therapy, but there's the power of saying something, vocalizing it, taking it out of the body and making it real, and that's part of the therapeutic effect, that we take it out. And we will only really know the change, and we'll only really be able to make change if we allow things to be real, as in come out of us and have it seen. But in some ways, that is also quite an exposing and vulnerable experience, because we're asking for something or allowing something else. In the same way in the career, it means a lot to us. So to actually then ask for something different, it can be quite a vulnerable experience to do that. So I think it is quite difficult to do. And I don't know if it's something that men find easy to do or not. But either way, I think it's quite a challenge. And it's not something, I'm not saying I always felt completely comfortable doing it. I guess I just weighed it up and decided that it's more important to ask than not.
Fantastic. Well, listen, can we give a clap for Graham, please? I know people are having their lunch. That was really good. And that was really interesting to have a lawyer give with a different perspective and a different angle.